0956 hours. A Ukrainian MiG-29 slices the sky, climbing through 1,000 feet. Its objective? A high-value target near Ork, a Russian ammunition depot. For 12 minutes, the sortie was routine, but unknown to the pilot, a sophisticated S-400 defense system near Melitopol was already awake. The lock was instantaneous, a hard fix from 120 kilometers out. A steady tone screamed in the pilot's headset, not a warning, but a death sentence. The missile was already in the air, 180 kilometers of explosive payload, a testament to modern weapons, accelerating past Mach 2 in its first second. Impact projected in 80 seconds. 90. If Providence intervened, the pilot wrenched the stick hard right. In the same motion, he deployed countermeasures, slamming the MiG into a 90-degree aspect to the enemy radar beam, a classic military tactic known as notching. He held that perpendicular heading for 8 agonizing seconds, dispensing chaff in programmed bursts, a crucial element of modern warfare. The aluminum strips bloomed into a spectral cloud, drifting at wind speed, each filament a mirror, reflecting the enemy's radar energy. 1,000 false positives. One aircraft now appeared as 100. The defense system's algorithms churned, trying to distinguish fighter from phantom. The returns blurred with ground clutter. At this angle, they were identical. On the enemy console, track quality degraded from solid to intermittent to lost. The 48N6 missile, now blind, switched to its terminal protocol. It screamed toward the last predicted intercept point. But the pilot and his aircraft were already gone. He was diving for the deck, the Earth rushing up to meet him. The missile's onboard seeker activated, its last desperate attempt to find a target. A target now 2 kilometers away, cloaked by a storm of chaff. Its proximity fuse registered nothing but aluminum rain. The warhead detonated uselessly, its shrapnel tearing through empty sky. This war analysis reveals the evasion worked because the S-400 employs Doppler processing to isolate moving targets from the ground. It searches for the velocity shift of an object, approaching or receding. It measures the change in frequency. But when a pilot flies perpendicular to the radar's line of sight, his relative velocity drops to 0. To the Doppler processor, in that moment of intense warfare, the fighter jet vanishes into the terrain. The missile was defeated. The pilot leveled off at 500 feet. He checked his 6. The missile's smoke trail dissipated into the morning haze. But this was only round 1. The Russian gravestone radar is a different beast, utilizing thousands of individual transmitter-receiver modules, a masterpiece of defense technology. It steers its beam electronically, jumping from horizon to zenith in a microsecond. Unlike older systems, it does not forget. When it loses a track, it remembers. Last known position, heading, speed. It runs the calculations. It anticipates the pilot's next move and focuses the search. He had bought himself 30 seconds, a lifetime on the edge of global conflict. The gravestone operators were already adapting, shifting through radar modes. This is the latest military update from the front. They activated bistatic mode, and in an instant, the pilot's escape route became a kill box. In bistatic mode, the radar splits itself. The transmitter remains at the primary site near Melitopol. The receiver sits 40 kilometers away. A different angle, a different perspective. Think of radar as a flashlight, where the bulb and your eyes are in the same location. Bistatic mode places that flashlight in one position while you observe from across a darkened room. Suddenly, you see shadows and reflections that were previously invisible. The MiG's warning receiver only detected the transmitter. The trap was already set. He felt the transmitter's pulse paint his aircraft. He never knew a receiver, 40 kilometers distant, was catching his ghost. A phantom reflection, a signal caught like light in a mirror. The geometry of this new warfare was unforgiving. Even at 500 feet below the main radar's line of sight, the pulse struck his airframe and scattered, a whisper traveling to a secondary receiver from an impossible angle. The signal was a flicker, a ghost on the screen. But it was enough. The hunter had his prey. But this time, there was no immediate launch. They had a more lethal plan. At 10:03 hours, a Buck M3 weapon system came online. The targeting data streamed in. The crew was ready, waiting for the MiG to hit a precise point in space, a slight rise in the terrain. It overlooked the valley. His transit time, 90 seconds. There was no search, no hunt. The S-400 defense system had already done the work. It fed them a perfect firing solution. Altitude, 500 feet. Speed, 480 knots. Heading, 067. Time to target, 85 seconds. The automated systems of modern warfare took control. The machine calculated with cold precision. The 9S-36M radar flared to life, from cold to radiating in 3 seconds. Its phased array was already locked on the exact bearing, a kill box in the sky. This was not a random encounter. This was an execution. The S-400's war analysis had calculated not just his present location, but his future one. It factored in terrain masking, fuel burn, even the pilot's own instincts, a textbook example of advanced defense technology. Ukrainian troops favored this valley. It offered the best cover. Today, that predictability was a death sentence. Inside the cockpit, chaos erupted. The radar warning receiver screamed. A hard lock, Buck acquisition, signal strength, maximum. Track mode engaged. It was an ambush. At this range, he had perhaps 4 seconds until launch. The military geometry of the trap was perfect. The valley walls became a cage, ridgelines to his left and right. He couldn't dive. The earth was too close. He couldn't climb. To do so would expose him to every SAM in a 50-kilometer radius. The Buck had him boxed in. No good options remained. 2 9M3 17M missiles ignited. Roaring from their tubes, these modern weapons accelerated with brutal force. They shattered the sound barrier before even clearing the trees. Each weighed 690 kilograms, capable of pulling 35 Gs in the terminal phase. Maneuvers no pilot could escape. On his warning display, 2 diamonds ascended, their intercept vectors a cold calculation. Impact in 31 seconds. But the true terror of this particular defense system was yet to be revealed. This was not an older system. Breaking the radar lock would not save him. These weapons used command guidance. The ground radar fed the missiles a constant stream of updates, painting the target until the final moments. Evading the lock was futile. The missiles would continue their hunt. The pilot had one desperate gambit. It would cost him. He hauled the stick back. Throttles slammed to their stops. He was trading energy for altitude, a desperate vertical climb into the cold sky. The MiG clawed for the sky. The G-meter needle slammed against its pin, 7.5. The airframe groaned under the load, 7.5 times its normal weight. His G-suit constricted, a python's grip forcing blood to his brain. It wasn't enough. The gray veil crept in, tunnel vision. Through the pinhole of his remaining sight, he watched the altimeter spin 2,000 feet, 3,000, 4,000. At 4,500 feet, he punched the countermeasures. A cascade of chaff bloomed as he rolled, inverted, and pulled. A perfect defensive maneuver. The aluminum strips created a blizzard on the enemy's radar scope. The first missile reacted. It attempted to follow the aggressive maneuver, but its roll rate was too slow. The missile screamed past, just 100 meters below, so close the pilot could see its control surfaces fighting the air. The second missile, a product of advanced defense technology, was more lethal. Its guidance system calculated the MiG's future position. It anticipated the end of his role. But the pilot, a veteran of this new era of modern warfare, was one step ahead. He broke the sequence. Halfway through, he slammed the stick forward, forcing negative Gs, bunting the jet toward the Earth. The missile's computer fought to correct its course. Too late. It overshot by 200 meters, its proximity fuse detonating on a cloud of ghost images. Survival, but at a cost. The price was fuel. Max Afterburner had burned 300 kilograms in just 40 seconds. His airspeed bled off, dropping to 180 knots. Dangerously close to a stall, the weapon still slung under wing. On the ground, the Buck crew was not finished. The reload drill began. The 9T-243 transport vehicle reversed into position. Its hydraulic crane was already hoisting another missile, a fresh threat, locked into place. These soldiers had drilled this sequence countless times, pure muscle memory, a testament to their military training. Mechanical precision. The target was still in their kill box, slow from his last maneuver, vulnerable. This war was unforgiving. The battery commander watched the automated reload, his eyes fixed on the MiG's radar track. The Ukrainian pilot was climbing to his weapons release point. He needed 15,000 feet. Only then could the GBU-39s achieve their maximum standoff range. That climb was a race against time. 90 seconds to altitude. The reload would take 45. The third missile launched just as the pilot clawed his way to 14,000 feet. A fourth followed, almost instantly. But the ground crew had made a fatal error in this complex engagement of warfare. They fired simultaneously, not staggered. A small mistake. But in the calculus of air combat, small mistakes are the difference between life and death. Both. Modern weapons would arrive at the exact same instant. It created one defensive problem, not two. Not a sequence. The pilot held his course. 12 agonizing seconds ticked by. He needed the weapon's GPS receivers to lock. They had to acquire satellite data, wind, pressure. The GBU-39s required it for initial guidance. Without it, they were just expensive, unguided bombs. 14 seconds. The inbound missiles were closing at Mach 4. The pilot acted. He pickled both weapons. The GBU-39s dropped clean. Their wings snapped open as he rolled inverted, pulling hard, yanking the nose toward the earth. 7 Gs crushed him into his seat. The missile's guidance system screamed, trying to follow. But physics is a harsh mistress. A projectile at Mach 4 cannot turn on a dime. It needs nearly 2 kilometers to reverse course. It was a freight train chasing a ghost. A U-turn. The MiG, a nimble tool of the Air Force, could reverse direction in 200 meters. The missiles, slaves to their own momentum, carved massive, useless arcs through the cold sky. Both 9M317Ms overshot. Their proximity fuses found only empty air. A critical war analysis of the engagement would show this moment as decisive. They detonated where the MiG was 3 seconds before. The pilot leveled out, 8,000 feet. His eyes scanned the fuel gauge. 1,850 kilograms remaining. The defensive fight had vaporized his reserves. Enough to get home, but only if. He flew straight and level, no afterburner. And if no one else was hunting him, this is the reality of a global conflict. That's when his threat receiver screamed a new warning. A search radar, Su-35S, bearing 240. Range, 85 kilometers. And it was closing fast. The fighter was cued by the same defense systems network that controlled the Buck. This was not a random encounter. This was a coordinated hunt. He was the prey. For the Su-35 pilot, the MiG appeared as a single, urgent tone on his radar warning receiver. A single bright dot crawled across his display. 280 knots, a pathetic speed. The Russian pilot jammed his throttles to the firewall, screaming past 500 knots. At this closure rate, the kill window would open in 3 minutes. The Ukrainian pilot had defied the S-400. He had outmaneuvered the Buck. But each victory in this modern warfare had extracted a heavy price. He had no speed. His fuel was critical. He was out of options. The Su-35 now hunting him was the apex predator of this global conflict. Everything the MiG-29 was not. A masterpiece of defense technology. Powerful. Engineered for intercepts beyond visual range, the aircraft's advanced radar could paint 30 targets simultaneously, while its fire control engaged 8. But at this moment, it was focused on only one. The Ukrainian fighter materialized on his screen, every detail crystal clear. Altitude, 8,000 feet and descending. Speed, bleeding down to 270 knots. Heading, 247. He was running for home. At 60 kilometers, the Su-35 achieved a hard lock. An R-77 active radar missile was awake. The weapon had a reach of 110 kilometers. But at that extreme range, the probability of intercept fell below 50%. Better to close the distance, guarantee the kill. But the Ukrainian pilot was trapped in an impossible calculation. He had to conserve what little airspeed he had or risk going dry deep inside hostile territory. It was a duel in the sky, his opponent calmly walking closer for a perfect shot. The R-77 launch came at 55 kilometers. The Russian pilot saw the missile separate from the pylon. A half second of silence, then a violent burst of white flame as the motor ignited. This modern weapon accelerated past Mach 4. Its active seeker was already hunting, a data link feeding it mid-course corrections. This was the brutal reality of air warfare. Time to impact, 47 seconds. The Ukrainian pilot held. He waited until the last possible second to execute his final desperate move. What followed should not have been possible. The MiG's nose pitched up, 30 degrees, 40, 60. The air. Speed bled away, hemorrhaging from the airframe. At 70 degrees nose up, doing 180 knots, he was barely flying. The pilot slammed the rudder hard over. The jet's nose swung past the vertical even as its body continued forward. It had essentially stopped, in midair, caught by an unseen hand. The R-77's advanced guidance computer, a pinnacle of its defense systems, had been designed to intercept aircraft in flight, not levitating metal statues. Its complex algorithms struggled to calculate a solution for a target with zero forward velocity. Intercept plot failed. It tried again. Failed again. By the time the weapon's logic defaulted to simply flying towards the target's last known position, the MiG was already falling through its flight path. The missile shrieked past, overshooting by 300 meters. Its proximity fuse found only empty sky. The Russian pilot could not believe his eyes. The Ukrainian had deliberately stalled his aircraft at 8,000 feet to break the lock. A textbook war analysis would call it suicide. Now, the MiG tumbled toward the Earth, its energy state completely depleted, its nose desperately hunting for airflow like a brick searching for the ground. He recovered the aircraft at 5,000 feet, immediately diving for the deck, even as his guided bombs continued their silent journey to their target. But the Su-35 now had total control of the engagement. The pilot climbed to 20,000 feet, rolled inverted, and looked down through his canopy at the struggling MiG far below. From this altitude, he owned the sky. The Ukrainian had nowhere left to run. The MiG couldn't climb to fight. It had no energy. It couldn't turn. It had no speed. It was a wounded animal trying to flee on a broken leg. The Russians selected an R-73, an infrared missile for the close-range kill. No radar warning would sound for this one. The seeker was entirely passive, homing in on the raw heat of the engine. The dive to attack was a certainty. A textbook maneuver. The Russian pilot pushed his nose over, letting gravity become his engine, accelerating through 600 knots. In the MiG's mirrors, the enemy grew larger. A closing threat. At 4 kilometers, he fired. The R-73 missile screamed from the rail. Its infrared seeker achieved an immediate lock on the MiG's engine heat. But the Ukrainian pilot had one final option. He pulled his nose vertical, straight up. He punched out every flare he had. Magnesium pellets erupted, a climbing spiral of blinding light. Each burned at 2,000 degrees Celsius, a wall of pure heat designed to fool primitive defense systems. The R-73's logic was overwhelmed. It chose the brightest source, flying harmlessly through the flare pattern. It missed the MiG by 50 meters. The Su-35 pilot watched his weapon fail. He pulled out of the dive, overshooting again. His fuel state was now a critical factor, a harsh reality of modern warfare. Another 5 minutes and he would be forced to break contact. The Ukrainian pilot used those precious seconds. He nosed over, running for the deck. The engines were slammed to full military power. He was racing toward friendly airspace, now only 75 kilometers away. But first, He had to pass through the gauntlet. He had to survive what was waiting at Orikefe. At 10:14 hours, the MiG pilot skimmed across farmland, 50 feet off the dirt. His engine coughed, starved of fuel. Then, the sky ahead was torn apart by tracers erupting from a tree line. A ZSU Shilka. It had been waiting, placed with precision by the same air defense network orchestrating this entire war. 4 23mm cannons, each firing 850 rounds per minute. Radar-guided. An effective range of 2.5 kilometers. At this altitude, at this speed, the geometry was a death sentence. He would fly through the stream of fire in 2 seconds. The pilot didn't think. Thinking was a luxury he couldn't afford. He rolled inverted and pulled, flying upside down, negative G's pressing him into the canopy. Meters above the ground, the cannon rounds ripped the air above him, so close he could hear the crack of their passage. The Shilka gunner, shocked by the maneuver, cranked his turret down, walking the stream of fire towards the frantic aircraft. But tracking an inverted target at 50 feet meant the radar was fighting itself, trying to lock onto the ground return. The system hunted between the aircraft and the earth, confused. Still, 3 rounds punched through the vertical stabilizer. 2 more tore through the right wing. His instrument panel exploded in a forest of warning lights. Hydraulic pressure was dropping to 0. The flight controls were degrading. Manual reversion. The stick fought him. It felt connected to the control surfaces with concrete. But he was through. Trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid. Still flying. Behind him, the Shilka crew radioed his position to all Army units in the sector. Let other troops finish him. The pilot scanned his instruments through the chaos of warnings. 90 kilograms of fuel. 35 kilometers to friendly lines. Engine temperature climbing into the red. Oil pressure fading. The math was a razor's edge. The math said he could make it. But he needed 30 more seconds. At 10:15, 8 kilometers behind him, the first of the modern weapons arrived. Its target, the battalion command post. The weapon had flown for 6 minutes through a storm of GPS jamming, guided only by inertial navigation. A marvel of defense technology. The uncooled infrared seeker activated in the final seconds, searching for the target building. It acquired the heat signature against the cooler background. The bomb adjusted its flight path one last time, pitching over into its terminal dive. It struck at a 70-degree angle. The GBU-39's intelligent fuse counted the layers: steel, insulation, concrete. Then it detonated its 16 kilograms of high explosive. The AFX-757 detonated dead center on the operations roof. The blast obliterated the target in 0.003 seconds. Strategic maps of the Probosc offensive turned to ash. The radios coordinating 2,000 Army troops vaporized. The nerve center of the military advance was severed. A fraction of a second later, the second weapon found its mark. It struck the ammunition bunker. This was the primary objective. 500 tons of modern weapons, 152mm shells, grad rockets, and mortar rounds, all packed into a space designed for only 300. The bomb's penetrator core tore through 3 feet of reinforced concrete defense. Then the fuse ignited. A catastrophic chain reaction erupted. Each 152mm shell held 8 kilograms of high explosive. Each grad rocket, 20 kilograms. In this theater of modern warfare, the thermal pulse from one detonation triggered the next in a violent cascade. The bunker became a volcano, a flashpoint in a global conflict. The concrete roof contained the blast for a mere 0.1 seconds before it failed. It disintegrated. The Air Force pilot crossed into friendly airspace at 10:17, his cockpit a nightmare of screaming alerts. Every light illuminated. Engine temperature beyond the red line, into territory the gauges couldn't measure. 30 kilograms of fuel remained. The hydraulics were gone, controls barely responding. The forward airstrip materialized through the haze, a critical military update 3 kilometers out. Dead ahead, no time for standard patterns, no time for procedures. He fought the stick, deploying the landing gear with the emergency pneumatics. 2 heavy clunks from the mains. Silence from the nose. The runway rushed toward him at 180 knots as he held the aircraft's nose high. Main wheels touched down hard. A bounce, then a screech of rubber on tarmac. The nose gear slammed down and locked. A heartbeat before the fuselage would have scraped the pavement. Both engines flamed out as he wrestled the jet off the main runway. The turbine spooled down with a final grinding shriek of metal on metal, a brutal sound of warfare. The aircraft rolled to a stop 50 meters shy of the maintenance hangar. Leaking fluids, trailing smoke, its defense systems shredded. But the pilot was home, and the war was far from over.